I'm Soren Johnson, and I'm the CEO of Mohawk Games. You know, we could have made a game like Offworld set on Earth, but it would be a lot less plausible that, you know, you'd have like this empty space to develop. Strategy games often work best if they start on an empty map, so that, you know, the idea you have a sort of an exploration phase and you feel like you're kind of the first colonists of an area.
I'm Paul Boyer. I'm the lead designer of Galactic Civilizations III. Designing in space is, in some ways, for strategy, especially for turn-based, for a space game, is actually easier because most of your ships are rigid body. They don't have crazy animations because the space is literally just, most of the time, nothing. You don't have to worry about terrains or environments or collision with the ground or the rocks or the this or the that.
I'm Callum McCall, lead designer for Ashes of the Singularity. I think space and sci-fi is very useful for designers because it gives the flexibility to make the units feel different to each other as well as visually intuitive. If you look at a Marine in StarCraft and compare that to a Zergling, it's quite obvious the difference. You won't mistake them for each other. Whereas if you compare a Greek hoplite to a Persian soldier, like, it's not always going to be that obvious, especially if it's on a big scale.
You know, in Civ, when you play the game, you're often, when you design the game, you're often critiqued by how your game compares to real history, right? And even though Civ's pretty explicit that this is kind of like a goofy version of history, like, it's still, people still want to feel like it matches up to their understanding of what writing is and democracy is and the pyramids and so on.
This is something that Company of Heroes both 1 and 2 has had to tackle, and what they've done is they've had a lot of units implemented in those games which are pretty unhistorical in terms of how much they were actually used and actually deployed. If you look at the Ostwind, that was hardly ever used at all. It was a very, very rare niche vehicle, and yet it's such a prominent part of Company of Heroes. And the reason why that is because it's very distinguishable, it's very intuitive, it looks very different to a regular tank. And so with a historical game, you often will have to compromise historical accuracy for the sake of good, intuitive design where things look different and things are easy to understand what they do. Whereas with sci-fi, you don't have to make those compromises.
What we try really hard to do is not do anything that is blatantly false. You know, it's like but we do have to have all the way down to like the way inertia works with kinetic weapons and, you know, and mass versus engines and speed and resources, and those things are all accounted for to some degree.
I'm not really super comfortable as a designer making up this brand new fiction from whole cloth. That's not really my type of thing, and so I wanted it to be, even though it was in the future, wanted to be pretty grounded, which is why we've set the game in the solar system. It's attached to things that people know, and the other nice thing about that is we can kind of use science as like a starting point for the game design. So, you know, we didn't just kind of randomly come up with the resources. We looked at like, well, what resources are available on Mars, and, you know, we did some research and like, how would you survive on Mars, right? And so there is water available, and so, you know, obviously you can use that, but that's also probably going to be your source of oxygen and fuel in the form of hydrogen. We
kind of nod and wink a little about what resources are used for what, because it really breaks down to what's fun and getting a good balance to the gameplay.
So we've recently been working on 2 new juggernauts, and it's more like, how can we fill a role that the game needs, but we also want something that is really unique and isn't a slightly bigger version of existing units. That is the good thing about sci-fi, is that you don't have to think about the physics and the realism, and you can just do whatever you want and what's good for other parts of the game without having to think about, that's not realistic.
Actually, I'd say my thing generally is making history games. That's probably the thing I relate to the most, for similar reasons to why I thought Mars was actually a good starting point in that it's something that people are familiar with to some extent and does start you off with some design ideas because of like, yeah, it's got water and what would we do with that? And so history is the same concept of like, like in medieval times, there was a certain way that family lineages worked and dynasties grew. And like, so that's, for example, how Crusader Kings built their gameplay off of, right?
Well, I just think people really like the idea of space. They like the idea of being out there. That's why a lot of our fans are like Star Trek fans or Star Wars fans. They want to go out there and explore. When you're exploring and you find that great world, that you uncover it, you're like, that's what the Bungie guys would call like a second of fun.